Welcome back to the next lecture, and this is a very important one because in this one we're going to start taking decisions using code. So, JavaScript, as well as most other programming languages out there, has a couple of control structures, which are features that allow us to execute only certain parts of our code or to execute parts multiple times. And the first control structure that we will talk about is the if-else statement, which is a conditional which basically allows us to take decisions using code. Okay, so let me show you how that works. And first, let's bring back some of our variables. So let's say first name is again John. And now let's create a variable that we didn't use before, which is for the civil status. So civil status. And so this one basically says if you're married or single or divorced or something like that. And so let's just say that John is a single. Okay, so he's not married. Now what we want to do here is to log a string to the console whether he is married or not. Okay, and for that we can use an if-else statement to take decisions. So we write if, and then we open parentheses, and then in here we have to write a logical condition. So something that returns a boolean true or false value. So that's something like we did before. So for example, this one here. So this will return a true or false value, and so it's a perfect logic condition. Okay, now in this case we don't want a greater or a smaller comparison like the one that I showed you, but instead we want an equality operator. So basically what we want to do is to test if the civil status is married. So let me show you how to do that. So we can say civil status equals married. Okay, and so this condition here will return true if the civil status is married and false if it's not. Okay, so this here again is like a logical operator which returns true or false. There's also the version with just two equals, but let's talk about that one a bit later. Okay, so again, this here will test whether the civil status is married or not. And then we open curly braces, and then this here is the block, so the if block. And in here we can now write our instructions basically. So in this case our console.log. And what we want to log to the console is first name is married. So if the civil status is married, then this text here will be logged to the console, and if not, well, then nothing happens. So let's reload it, and indeed, nothing happens. And that's because right now, this here turns out to be false, right? Because the civil status is actually single and not married. And so this is different. And so when we have false, well, then this piece of code is not executed. Let's change it here to married for a second just to see if it's working just fine. And it is. So now it says John is married because the civil status is the exact same thing as married here. All right. Anyway, let's change it back to single because now I want to show you the else part of the if-else statement. So we can have only the if part, but we can also add an else statement. So we can say else, and then we have the else block here. And so what this does is that if this is not true here, so if it's false, well, then it will execute the else block, okay? So let's test that out. We'll hopefully marry soon, okay? And so that, of course, means that he is not married at this point. So let's test it, and let's keep in mind that here it says single. And so this part here will not be executed because this here is false. And that means that we're going to jump right to the else block, and so this text here should be logged to the console. Check it out, and yeah, it works. So John will hopefully marry soon. Now let's say that we actually have a Boolean variable already. So we can have a variable called isMarried. And let's set it to false, and let's then test what happens in that case. So instead of this test here, we could put is married, and then we could put equals true. But that part is actually not really necessary, right? Because what we need here in this condition is a true or false value. But this is married variable is already a Boolean. So right now it is set to false, but we could also set it to true. So let's do that. And so again, what we want here is a true-false value. But is married is already true, so it is already a Boolean, and so this part is not even necessary. Okay, does that make sense? So here we just need a true-false value again. So no need to write the true. Let's test that, and now it says John is married here, coming from line 173, so this one here. Of course, this one here is still coming from this if-else statement from before, where we say that the civil status is single and not married. But this is just another example where I wanted to show you that it's actually enough to pass a true or false value here into this condition. Okay, so I hope that makes sense, that you now learned how we can make decisions using code. And of course, we could do much more difficult and much more complex stuff into these blocks, the if block or the else block. All right, now just to finish this lecture, let's bring back the code from our coding challenge that we coded up before, and let's basically write something better to the console. Okay, so what we did here is to simply log this string here and then together with this true-false value. So that's not really the best solution, right? To just print true-false to the console. So now that you know the if-else statement, we can do a lot better than this, right? So what we can do instead of all of this, let's comment it out actually, is to write if BMI Mark is greater than BMI John. Well, in this case, we want to print something to the console, and if not, then we want to log something else. Okay? So in this case, we have, of course, marks, and now the escape string. Then John's. And of course, the escaping. All right, let's copy it. And so here it's the other way around. Higher than marks. Okay, so let's quickly recap what we did here. So we're testing if the BMI of Mark is greater than John's. Okay, and so this here, of course, as you already know, will return a true or false value, and that is exactly what we need in an if-else statement. And so in this case, it will then log to the console Mark's BMI is higher than John's. And if it's not, so if this here is false, well then of course John's BMI must be higher than Mark's. And so then that's exactly what we log to the console. All right, and now just to test it out, we say Mark's BMI is higher than John's. Just missing the S, but that doesn't really matter. And just to test the other scenario, let's quickly increase this mass here. And so now John's should be larger. And indeed, so now John's BMI is higher than Mark's. Okay, putting it back, and so now again, Mark's should be higher. And indeed, it is working. And so now you know how to take decisions with code. That's awesome. But this is really just the fundamentals of conditionals and decision taking with code. And so there's a lot more to learn. And so yeah, stay tuned for the next videos.